We encourage this lady to continue, and we encourage all Africans who are standing against tyranny to keep standing, keep standing. Thank you so much. So, another thing that I saw this week, as you know, this is my social media review, is Obama getting exposed. Go check out the video. Obama getting exposed that he has used false, the false security and all those things, that he was a government asset, that he's a fraud, that he may face military trial, that he was trying to destroy America from the inside. Like the crazy times that we're living in, everything will be exposed, all eyes will be revealed, including Obama. As you know, it has now been revealed that he was even behind the Islamist terrorists in Africa, those who destroyed Libya, along with Qatar, and Trump. This will lead us into Trump. Trump just went to Qatar and met them. These people are monarchies, zero democracy over there, and they support Islamist terrorists in Africa. He never called out any of that. But then he goes in front of the whole world and starts lying fiction about this what this man was posting about. um, Jeff Timmer talking about fun fact: there's no white genocide happening in South Africa. Trump, Musk, Vance, Rubio, and the rest are lying, and they're racist. And did I mention they're lying? Meanwhile, most of America's media, crickets, 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 crickets. Now, what are they cricketing about? Because, my people, check this out. Larry Madowo doing a great job. The images that Trump actually holds up, the images.
According to Reuters, this image is actually from the Democratic Republic of Congo, and it was filmed by Reuters video journalist. Reuters fact-check team said it actually showed humanitarian workers lifting body bags in Goma following a deadly assault by the rebel group M23. It's a screen grab.
So you see the audacity, of inventing, making up a fiction white genocide in South Africa, and then using the images of actually a real genocide that is being ignored, which is the genocide against the Congo people, genocide being committed by the Kagamistan in Rwanda, which is supported by the USA, which was actually brought into power by the USA, by the Clintons, the Kagamistan in Rwanda, supported by the USA, by Qatar, by the UK. They don't denounce it. And then they invent a fiction, white genocide in South Africa. And to speak about the fiction, white genocide, they use the images of the genocide that they ignore because it's black people, or what is it, because it's Congo, because the people who are committing genocide in Congo, the Kagamistan in Rwanda, is actually supported by the USA. Like, the outrageous lie was caught and exposed. So the other thing that I wanted to say about this is that keep in mind that South Africa is a democracy. South Africa is a democracy, so they are allowed to have dialogue. And the opposition, the man who was speaking that Trump was denouncing, is the opposition in South Africa. They're allowed to have freedom of speech, and they can say whatever they want to say, because have freedom of speech, and it's a democracy. And the song that he's complaining about, a song, um, this man, Julius Malema, has actually never killed anybody, but Trump actually just went to the Middle East and he met with people who are still on the terrorist list, who have killed people who are terrorists, and all these Arab leaders who are monarchies, zero democracy, but he never denounced that. And South Africa is a democracy, and they're allowed to compete in the opposition. So imagine you're a president and you're being questioned about what the opposition said when you're going to another country. And then, and then I have to say that the South African president was also very, very, very weak in defending himself and defending his case. Most likely that he was not prepared. The other thing he could have reminded Trump is that we are here in America and Canada, and this is a land. This is a land where Europeans, white people, Trump, have actually committed genocide on the native people of this land, exterminated the native people of this land, and took over the land, which is something that the Europeans also tried to do in South Africa, but Africans in South Africa resisted and are still alive, unlike here in Canada, in the USA, where the native people have been genocided and conquered. So I don't know if Trump and Musk were hoping or that Africans also become colonized and exterminated, because this is what would have happened in South Africa with the whole apartheid and with the whole people coming in from Europe and taking over South Africa by the power of the guns. We're talking about white people coming in from Europe and taking over South Africa, and then they had to be fought, they had to be resisted. And Trump likes to talk about illegal immigrants. What if we saw that as illegal immigration? Because people coming from Europe, do they have passport? Do they have visas? And then coming into South Africa and then imposing themselves by the gun. I mean, isn't that like armed illegal immigration? And so, if you have inherited land, if you inherited land that is stolen by the power of the gun, by the people who are practicing illegal immigration, then if you inherited that land, of course you want to keep the land. But what about, and then when people when the original owners of the land try to take back the land, you're like, taking back the land without compensation. You're like, oh, taking back the land without compensation. But here is an idea that you can reflect on. When speaking about compensation, what about all the money that people who have been occupying this land and exploiting this land, in this case the Europeans or the white people who have been exploiting and occupying this land and making money on this land, how much compensation have they offered to the original uh, inhabitants of that land, the Africans, the black people? How much compensation have they offered for generations since they have been exploiting that land and making so much money off the land? How much revenue sharing did they actually do? So if people have made so much money, and how much money have they actually made on the land since they have been occupying the land? So if people were to calculate how much money that land, how much wealth that land has produced for them, and then say, oh, well, how much compensation did you offer versus how much revenues that you made on this land? How much revenue sharing did you offer versus how much revenues that you made on this land? And now you speak about compensation, but you have been so compensated because you have made so much money and you have become so rich by this land. So for people to take away the land without compensation, but you get to keep all the wealth that you have made on that land, I think it's a pretty great deal. I think it's a pretty great deal, my people. If it's not a pretty great deal, then let us know how much money that you have made on that land as you were exploiting it and occupying it. And let's see how much compensation that you have offered to the local people that you found on that land, and then we can start talking about compensation. So I may end on that, talking about, like, when people talk about compensation, when they have made so much money on that land already without sharing any of the revenues. It reminds me of, like the Haitians when they freed themselves from slavery, from enslavement after 400 years, a couple of 100 years of enslavement, and they fought for their freedom. It wasn't given to them. Then the French were like, oh, you need to pay us. You need to pay us compensation for the loss of income that we are going to lose because you are free. So then they are in debt for more generations because they fought and freed themselves from slavery. So don't talk about all the money that they made from slavery. No, they don't look at that. They're entitled to it. They're like, no, we own you, and if we lose you, then you need to compensate us for the loss of you working for us for free. So then Haiti had to pay, but nobody spoke about how much money you made on the Haitians. Became billionaires, and people inherit billionaires. You know, they don't talk about that. So these are all topics of reflection. And then, of course, we know the influence of Elon Musk. Elon Musk, who grew up in South Africa. And Elon Musk, who there's been a documentary about him, actually, a documentary on Democracy Now, which talks about his history, and how he comes from. You know, let me show you the Democracy Now, Elon Musk, and how him and his group, you know, his group coming out of ties to apartheid and
This is
the
Democracy Now!
neo-Nazi movements. So I encourage you guys to go and watch it so you may understand it. Once again, people came to Africa and they became so rich. Like Elon Musk family became very rich, exploiting Africa. Nobody ever talks about that. And then he came to America and got a lot of support from the American government. He's not a billionaire by accident. He comes from people who got rich by exploiting and getting rich in Africa. And then he comes to America, makes so much money. So I don't know if he has beef with South Africa, even though they became billionaires and made so much money for being in South Africa. Let's listen a tiny little bit.
In the 1950s are when the first laws, South Africa had discriminatory laws before, but you see the specific apartheid laws, which are much more aggressive, and in many ways reminiscent of the Nazi Nuremberg laws against Jews in the 1930s. They have very similar echoes in stripping black people from the right to work in certain places, their movements, controlling them, confining them to areas. You already had a situation which is now, come to the fore because of recent events with Trump. But
you mean with Elon Musk giving the Nazi salute?
Yes, but also with the sanctions over land, is that the 1913 Land Act had already deprived most black people of land in South Africa anyway. At that point, the 7% or 10%, as it was, of the population that was white owned more than 85% of the land under the Land Act of 1913.
So, my people, you can continue the document and listen to this. So, imagine people come and they create laws to dispossess, to steal, to take away land from the original inhabitants, the black people. And then when black people try to take back the land, they're like, oh, white genocide, white genocide. And then they're trying to manipulate their way into the South African market so that Elon Musk can sell his satellite. And then you wonder, if people are even committing crimes against you, then why are you even trying to do business in that country? Like, why are you insisting and manipulating your way into the country if the country is committing genocide? So they have already like manipulated their way into Congo, selling the Starlink satellites in Congo. And then you wonder, like, what are the national security risks when people are capable of lying, making up a fiction white genocide when they have been ignoring an actual genocide in Congo? What are the security risks when then they have satellite access, my people? These are all questions that people have to think about, because it's not just about doing business, it's also the philosophy of the people you're doing business with. And if you're doing business with people who don't want you to even exist, what do you think is going to happen? What if they use their businesses to continue to colonize you, oppress you, and to do what they accuse you of doing, which is false? Because if anybody has committed genocide on Africans, it's actually Europeans who have committed genocide on Africans. But now inventing a white genocide fiction, wow, so offensive.
So the apartheid laws kick in the 1950s. Elon Musk was born in 1971 in Johannesburg. And at that point, the Prime Minister was a guy called John Vorster. And John Vorster's background is very telling, really, because Vorster in the 1930s had been a member of a neo-Nazi militia called the OB, which was openly sympathetic and linked to the Nazis in Germany. It was responsible for all kinds of attacks, but including burning Jews out of their businesses in Johannesburg.
And we're talking about what years?
In the 1930s, so the late 1930s. And then South Africa goes to war as an ally of Britain against Hitler. The OB and the groups that support them, like Vorster, people like Vorster, they actively oppose that. They actually are in touch with, OB is in touch with German military intelligence, and they plan to assassinate the Prime Minister of South Africa, Jan Smuts, and overthrow the government and have it support Hitler. That plan fails because the Germans are unable to provide the necessary weapons and back out. But in 1942, John Vorster, later Prime Minister, stands up and gives a speech, and he talks about the system that their kind of ideological belief system, which was Christian nationalism. And he says, Christian nationalism in South Africa is the same as Nazism in Germany and fascism in Italy. It's all anti-democratic. It's all the same thing. By 1971, when Elon Musk is born, that man is the Prime Minister of South Africa. And Christian nationalism is the basis of not only the political philosophy, but the entire education system that Elon Musk is brought up into.
So take us from Elon Musk's grandfather moving to South Africa in the 50s to his father, how they gained their wealth.
So Elon Musk's grandfather moves there in the 1950s. He's not particularly prosperous. He arrives without a lot of money, but it's Elon Musk's father, Errol, who makes the real money, principally through investments in emerald mines in Zambia. And, mining conditions in southern Africa in that period were really pretty dire in the 1960s and 70s. Very high death rate, very poor conditions, but the owners got very rich. And
you hear that, my people? The owners got very rich by exploiting Africans, very, very poor conditions, And today their children are billionaires because of that back support, that foundation. But they're still not happy. No matter how much money they make, no matter how many billions and millions they make, they're not happy. They still want to dominate. They're still willing to make up a fiction genocide in order to have business deals, to control, to have satellites over Africa. Like, listen to this. Just when are they ever going to be happy? Like, how much money is happy? And then they said America first. Trump says America first. Why can't they be happy with America and leave Africa alone? No, they have to try to sabotage Africa. They have to invent a white genocide. And then they have to bring their businesses in through manipulation. Because the issue now is ownership. South Africa being, after the local people, the black people being so oppressed for so long, they want ownership of everything that comes into South Africa, which is not a bad idea for local people to have ownership. But Musk doesn't want to give any ownership, despite the fact that he's a billionaire and he can enrich some local South African people by sharing ownership of, by allowing ownership, local ownership, 30%, they say. He doesn't want to do that. Despite the fact that his family became so rich by exploiting Africans, and he's already a billionaire, and he could afford to let Africans, be owners of whatever business is in South Africa and other places in Africa. But no, 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 no. He would rather invent, lie, manipulate in order to get the business deal. They're getting business deals. They're not even showing how their business is the best service, best this, best that, everything. Meritocracy, right? No, they're manipulating their way in. Oh, we are white people. There's a white genocide. Oh, you don't want us because we're white. But they have been owning the land, becoming billionaires, owning 80% of the wealth while being 10%. They didn't see none of that. They're not grateful for none of that. They want more. They want everything. And when black people resist, they have to invent oh a white genocide in order to distract from the real genocide against Africans, against Congolese people who are dying, who have been dying. 15 million of Congolese people have died in a genocide, silent, because the Kagamistan in Rwanda, which is killing and plundering in Congo, is actually supported by the USA. And because the minerals that they're plundering in Congo, these people actually use these minerals. They use these minerals in their cars, in their phones, in their satellites, in whatever they're sending out there. They need Congo, they need Africa. But instead of giving Africans a fair deal, a clear deal, no, they want to manipulate. They want to invent some fiction drama, portray themselves as the victims while they are the exploiters, and then get the business deals. It's crazy. Oh, my people, let's listen a little bit more, because this guy really exposed it, and you have to know these things to understand. So I'm cautioning and warning Trump that he's going to lose his momentum if he doesn't understand the history, the politics, because Africa is not asleep anymore, and Africans are not sleeping, and they're not going to accept for people to invent a genocide when they are the exploited and the genocided, who have actually welcomed people who have become so rich on the African continent, but they're still not grateful. They don't see how much they have acquired, how much wealth, despite being 10% owning over 50% of the country. They don't see none of that. They still want everything and willing to lie and manipulate to get those business deals. Africans are not sleeping, and they're not going to take it. So Trump wants Africans on his side. He better come back to the truth. He can't be lying. He can't be caught lying. And the people who are next to him, who gave him that fake story, and then he actually shows an image of the Congo. That is the universe speaking. You cannot play, you cannot lie, because the universe is watching you, man. The universe would embarrass you internationally like that when you lie, and then you get caught so blatantly on the genocide that you ignore. So Trump will lose his momentum because he's heavily, clearly influenced by Elon Musk. Elon Musk, who clearly has beef with South Africa due to his background. Let's watch.
And Musk lived what can only be described as a neo-colonial life. If you were white South African in that period and you had any money at all, you lived with servants at your beck and call, you lived in sprawling housing, and what you see with Elon Musk is that when we get a glimpse into just how much money he had when he and Elon's mother get divorced, she says at the time that, well, he owns a yacht, he owns a jet, he owns several houses, so there was considerable wealth there.
Was the grandfather of Elon Musk on the record in his support for Forster?
Well, he was certainly on the record in his support for apartheid, very vividly so, yes. And he said that that's why he'd moved to South Africa from Canada in 1940 was in support of it. Now,
You hear that? Move from Canada to South Africa because South Africa was practicing apartheid so that he can live the racist life exploiting the native people and getting rich, becoming a billionaire, not being grateful. And then when black people become free, they want to run away from South Africa. They want to come to Africa, become rich, oppressing Africans. And then when Africans become free, they want to run away from Africa and talking about white genocide. No, what?
grandfather himself is killed a few years later in a plane crash, but is not known what Elon Musk's grandmother's personal views of Forster particularly were, but they were both avid supporters of the apartheid system, and the grandmother lived for a number of years afterwards.
So you've been talking about Elon Musk's maternal grandparents and how they moved to South Africa, but talk about their roots in Canada.
Originally, the grandparents have no connection to South Africa. They're born and grew up in Canada. And in the 1930s, the grandfather...
You hear that, my people? Born and grown in Canada, right here where I am. And Canada is a country where Europeans came and committed genocide on the native people, completely conquered them. The situation in which the native people in this country are in is unwishable upon anyone. You would not wish that to your worst of the worst of your enemy. So this is Canada, where Europeans have committed a real genocide against the original people of this land. It's not enough for them. It's not enough for them. They're like, let's go do this in Africa. Let's go to Africa where we're still oppressing the natives. Maybe Canada has become free, too free for them. Maybe Canada has become a democracy for them. We need to go and live in a place where we can still colonize, exploit, kill, oppress the natives. This is them.
Joshua Haldeman, he's head of the Canadian branch of a US movement called Technocracy Incorporated. And Technocracy Incorporated is essentially a movement to overthrow democratic government in the United States and have technocrats, but big businessmen in many ways, come in and run the country. That's partly a reaction to FDR's election and New Deal and massive reforms that he's into.
Americans, did you hear that? Have technocrats come in, billionaires come in and run your country. Sounds a little bit like something that we are currently living, actually. Allow these technocrats to come into your government and see everything. Give them the entire data of your government under the excuse that they're looking at the losses that you've had for your government, have the authority to go into all the records of all the people, the entire data, and take that. But they are private billionaires. What are they going to do with all that data that they have gotten from the entire country, from the entire government? These technocrats will come in and take everything. What are they going to do with all that data that they have taken in? And now you hear that they have this technocracy idea. Huh? They're pretty much politics. It's business in politics. Like what is going on? Just listen. You think these things are only going to happen to Africans, but then you realize that these things are actually happening to America and Canada and other places. Then you realize that maybe Africans are resisting this technocracy, and that is why the technocrats have to invent a fiction genocide in South Africa when we have a real genocide in Congo that they have ignored for years because they support the Kagamistan in Rwanda, who is plundering and killing in Congo, committing these genocides, because whatever he plunders, he brings to them, because their industries, the billionaires, cannot exist without Africa's riches and resources.
Introduced in the United States.
So from Canada, they would help to launch a coup against FDR?
No, Canada had its own branch of this movement to overthrow the government in Canada. Haldeman heads that branch. And through the 1930s, it takes on increasingly fascist overtones. They start wearing grey uniforms, modelled on the Nazi brown and black shirts. And so when Canada declares war on Germany in 1939 alongside Britain, the movement is banned because it's clearly sympathetic to Hitler. Then Haldeman is arrested.
Elon Musk's grandfather.
Elon Musk's grandfather is arrested. They find documents sympathetic to the Nazis and other subversive documents inside his house, and he is sent to prison for a few months and then remains on essentially a subversion watch list for the rest of the war. Yeah, so he's basically regarded as a Nazi sympathizer, a fellow traveler.
And about a decade later, he moves to South Africa. Why?
So after the war, he founds another political movement which has deep anti-Semitic roots and actually promotes the forgery, the protocols of the
Elders of Zion.
Elders of Zion, that's it. But obviously after the war and the Holocaust, there's no real appetite for that in Canada. It's a failing political movement. And so his eye casts down to South Africa. By 1950, the apartheid government has been in power for 2 years. And Haldeman looks at it and thinks that's just my kind of place, which clearly that was what he would want to create in Canada and had been trying to create in the 1930s. And so that's the point at which he and his wife, May, they move to South Africa and become very fervent supporters of apartheid.
Now, I wanted to blend in some breaking news in addition to cutting off all aid to South Africa, news of the region, and that is Sam Nujoma, the freedom fighter turned president who led Namibia to independence from apartheid South Africa in 1990, has died at the age of 95, often referred to as Namibia's founding father, known for his motto, a united people striving to achieve a common good for all members of the society will always emerge victorious. Used to be called Southwest Africa, became the independent Namibia. Talk about Sam Nujoma and how that fits into this picture of South Africa through apartheid.
So Sam Nujoma was the head of the Southwest Africa People's Organization, which was the liberation movement of Namibia. SWAPO, indeed. Really, SWAPO takes off and is able to have effect after Angola becomes independent with the fall of the Portuguese dictatorship. The Portuguese colonizers leave Angola, and Angola provides a base then for SWAPO to really fight to liberate Southwest Africa. That becomes known as the Border War. Euphemistically, the South Africans call it the Border War. They actually invade Angola in an attempt to overthrow the Marxist-leaning government of Angola, but also to keep SWAPO at bay. But the war goes on, and eventually South Africa loses that war.
By the way, let's take a moment to remember the genocide that was committed in Namibia by Germany, by the Germans, the Europeans, the white people who came to Namibia and committed a genocide in Namibia, exterminated local people, and until today, some of their hairs still on land in Namibia. So I'm just letting you know that as you make up a fiction genocide, we are going to start talking about the real genocides that are actually happening against Africans, not made up ones.
At that period, though, one of the things you see is that Peter Thiel, another member of the PayPal mafia, very close friend of Musk, he had been at school in Johannesburg, but his father gets a job on a uranium mine near Swakopmund in what is then Southwest Africa. And so Peter Thiel moves there as a child and goes to school there. And the thing to know about Southwest Africa, the reason it was separate from South Africa, is that it had been a German colony until the end of the First World War. Then it becomes falls under South Africa's mandate, partly because at that point South Africa was a British colony. When South Africa it becomes a republic in the 60s. It hangs on to Southwest Africa and it becomes a South African colony. But the population, big part of the population was of German ancestry. And you could, I remember going to Windhoek.
Trump is also of German ancestry, right? We are tying the dots together.
In the early 90s, and the main thoroughfare through Windhoek was called Hermann Goeringstrasse, named not after the Luftwaffe chief, but after his father, who had been a governor of German Southwest Africa. In Swakopmund, it was even more extreme. It was notorious for many, many years, really into the 80s and 90s, as a hotbed of open support, continued support for the Nazis and for Hitler. The New York Times has a story from the mid-70s of a reporter pulling up at a gas station to get his car filled with gas, and the attendant openly giving a Nazi salute and saying Heil Hitler to him. You could go to curio shops in Swakopmund and they would sell Nazi-themed mugs and flags and things, and they openly celebrated Hitler's birthday every May. Thiel went to a German school there, so that's the atmosphere he grows up in. His father is an official on a uranium mine there. And the interesting thing about the uranium mine, amongst many other things, is that it supplied part of the uranium to develop the South African atomic bombs in the 1970s, which were developed in league with Israel. Now, part of
You hear that, my people? And let's not forget that the uranium that they used for the atomic bomb that the USA dropped on Japan was taken from Congo. You hear that? You hear how they claim to own mines in Africa and then use the natural resources of those mines to become rich, to become billionaires, and then turn around and use their billions against the very same people, the very same continent of Africa that actually made them rich. They're not rich because they're any special. They ain't special. They're exploiters, colonizers, predators who are ungrateful for every good thing that has happened to them. But it's all going to be exposed.
So the deal with Israel was that South Africa would deliver yellowcake uranium to Israel. We don't know where the yellowcake came from. It may have come from that Swakopmund area mine, or it may have come from somewhere else in South Africa. But South Africa was shipping yellowcake to Israel at the same time because it too was developing nuclear weapons.
And talk about what Peter Thiel has said about all this. You know, I remember as we cover conventions for decades now, Peter Thiel standing up at the first Republican convention that nominated President Trump and, you know, supporting him and who he is.
So Peter Thiel has said of his time in Swakopmund, and particularly the school, which he describes as particularly a brutal education, that it turned him against government and into a libertarian. And I think that's an interesting element in all of this, is that one of the things that isn't necessarily appreciated outside of South Africa is that there's two kinds of whites there. There's the Afrikaners who we've been talking about, but there's a big English-speaking white population. And one of the aspects of the English-speaking population was they, on paper, said they opposed apartheid, but they gained all of its benefits.
So there are two tribes of white people. How come when they're talking about white people and Europeans, they never talk about tribes, eh? But when it's Africans, they're like, oh, tribes, tribal war. There's two tribes. They even speak two different languages. One is Dutch, the other one is British. One speaks English, the other one speaks Dutch or German. Even though they call themselves Afrikaner, but they are European Africans. This is why I was even telling people who talk about Elon Musk, is he African American? I'm like, no, he's European in Africa. So when he is a European in Africa and he leaves Africa, well, he's still a European. You know, he hasn't become an African because he went to Africa. The same way that African Americans, despite how many generations they've been in America, they're calling them African Americans. Why? Because of their origins. So he's also European in Africa. When he leaves Africa, he's still a European. Now he becomes a European American, not African American.
And most of them, certainly not all, there were some really heroic individuals, but most of them did very little to actually end apartheid. But one of the products of that is you have people like Musk and Thiel who have done very well and whose parents did very well out of the apartheid system, who deny responsibility for it. They blame it on the Afrikaners, they blame it on a government, extreme right-wing government. But then they have to explain how it is that their own parents were so able to do so well out of apartheid, and then they put that down to individual talent, that they're naturally gifted, and that leads them down this whole libertarian path, anti-government path, because essentially they have to explain how they too were benefits of apartheid without taking responsibility.
And talk about their relationship, Peter Thiel and Elon Musk.
Well, they're co-founders of.
Yeah, they want us to believe that they are naturally gifted. They don't want us to see the benefits, the privileges that they have gotten from being colonizers and exploiters. They want you to believe that they are smart and special because they have been able to exploit others, to colonize, to enslave, and then to get very rich from that business, or the business of colonization on oppression.
Of PayPal together. They both essentially share the same kind of worldview from what I can make out. They're libertarians. They're very opposed to any kind of DEI. You've seen their deep hostility to DEI. I think Thiel buys into the same message about anti-white, the war on white people in South Africa that South African white groups like AfriForum have been pushing in the United States. So I think that philosophically they're very similar, and obviously they have a very close relationship.
The audacity to talk about a war on whites as if South Africa has left Africa and went to Europe to invade Europe to unleash a war on whites. Huh? Imagine you're in your home and some people invade you, and then you resist, you fight back, and then they say that you're fighting a war against them. But did South Africa leave Africa and go and try to take land from the British, from the Dutch in Europe? No. They left Europe, came all the way to South Africa. And then when Africans resist, they're like, oh, there's a war on us. But you came all the way here for it. They want to get rich and become so rich, become billionaires, oppressing others. And then when you free yourself, they're like, oh, this place is hostile. They're against us. We have to live and go in America where we still own it. And let's invent that they're trying to kill us. What? Come on, guys. This is the era where you cannot lie anymore. And you cannot pretend to be a victim when you are actually the oppressor.
And then talk about David Sacks and talk more specifically about what you're referring to as the PayPal mafia. I don't think most people in this country understand all of these connections and this unusual situation where these some of the wealthiest men in the world work together, founded PayPal, and now surround the president of the United States.
Yeah, so David Sacks was born in Cape Town in the 70s. And he moves, his parents take him to Tennessee when he's 5 years old.
So you see all these billionaires or millionaires, very, very rich white people who got rich from Africa, right? But what have they done? What have they done for Africa since they got so rich, right? If they really cared about Africa and Africans, wouldn't we know about good things that they have done? And wouldn't Africans be wanting them in, because saying, oh, these are very good people, they have done so and so and so and so and so and so for us? But no, We don't know any good things that they have done for Africa, just exploitation and getting rich by exploitation. And now, still manipulating the narrative so they can continue to be richer, still against the idea that Africans may have some ownership of the land, of the businesses that are happening on their land. Wow. Look at all of them.
So he didn't grow up in the same milieu as Musk and Thiel, but he did grow up in the white South African diaspora, for sure. He clearly shares the same views. You know, as you say, they're part of the PayPal mafia. They all get rich from the creation of this company. They're all at the top running it. And now Sachs has emerged as Trump's AI and crypto czar. Again, part of the same project. So you can see this.
And he was a chief fundraiser for President Trump, as you said, born in Cape Town.
Yes, a big. So they've all emerged with essentially, from what I can make out, the same philosophy. And of course, that's only been reinforced by.
So what's going to happen when AI and all this technology and all these satellites who are coming into Africa have been created by people who have, ideologies of oppression and exploitation? What's going to happen? The AI, the machine, is a reflection of its creator. So they may even create AI and machines and all these things that are anti-African, that do harm to African people. Because what? Because their creators, the creator of the artificial intelligence and the machines, this is their ideology. You cannot give what you don't have. You know? Imagine this.
Their success. They're convinced, obviously, of their own genius and worth, and that government, whether it's South African government or in this case it seems to be the US government, is an obstacle to success.
And then we talked about.
And then how is government an obstacle? But then government has given so much money to Musk, for example, to be able to have his business. Look into how much money he has gotten from the government. So the government is a problem when it's trying to do something for everybody, but the government is not a problem when it's giving him millions for his business. And then when they're into government talking about, surveillancing government waste, but who is actually watching over them? If they're the ones supervising the entire government, talking about let's check out all the waste, but who is actually supervising them to know what they're doing with all that data? What if they steal all that data and go and use it in their AI project stuff and their machine project stuff? The data from the entire US government for however many years that it has existed before they took it from the inside. Oh my goodness, America.
About it in part one. Finally, Roloff Botha making this little quartet, white men of a certain age together, and his history also a part of the PayPal mafia.
Yes, he's part of it, and he has not emerged as a open supporter of Trump. I'm not entirely sure what his personal views are on this, but he does have a very interesting background. His grandfather was Pik Botha, who was the last foreign minister of apartheid South Africa. And Pik Botha's job essentially was to go around the world, particularly the West, and assure them that apartheid was being amended, was being dismantled, when in fact it was in many ways, although what was known as petty apartheid, which was the routine discriminations, the segregation, was being dismantled. In fact, the political system was actually only reinforcing it, solidifying it. The government of the time cooked up a system of 3 parliaments that would represent different parts of the population, but and give some people who weren't white a vote, but none of those people were black. There was no black parliament, partly because they were being pushed into the independent homelands. The idea was that they were no longer South African anyway. So Pik Botha went around trying to apologize and excuse for this system, and he was successful with conservatives. He saw a lot of Reagan and people. They loved him here, and the same with Thatcher in Britain. They saw them as the acceptable face of of apartheid. And he was so deluded by the end, he was convinced. I remember meeting him during the era of the transition to democracy from apartheid. He was so convinced that he was indispensable to the system that Mandela would have to appoint him foreign minister, which he duly did not.
Would you say the background of all these men's families was fleeing Mandela's South Africa?
Well, some of them left before. I mean, it's worth noting that Elon Musk left in 1988 at the age of 18, just as he would have become eligible to be drafted into the South African army, as all white males were at that point, which might have led him to fight the border war that I was talking about in Angola against SWAPO, or it might have led him into the townships, which at that point were in complete ferment. And, you know, you had a huge amount of civil unrest in South Africa at that point. The country had largely become ungovernable. It was under a state of emergency, and the white troops were trying to keep some form of order in the black townships like Soweto. He left before he had to do any of that.
So very interestingly, for people who aren't aware, Elon Musk had a company called X.com. It was an online bank. It merged with Confinity in 2000 to form PayPal. The merged company was renamed PayPal in 2001. And you have all of these guys who you've just laid out. Well, I think Botha is a partner at Sequoia Capital, but now key players. And that brings us to Trump's order on Friday to cut off all aid to South Africa and offer refugee status in the United States to the white South Africans who are, quote, victims of unjust racial discrimination. But interestingly, many in the right-wing white lobby say they want to stay and focus on ending black majority rule. This is Flip Bass, the chairperson of what's called the Solidarity Union.
We might disagree with the ANC, but we love the country. As in any community, there are...
We love the country. We love the country, right? Yeah, not the people of the country. We love the country because the country has made you so rich. What is there not to love? We love the country. Of course you love the country. You are rich, you got land, you're exploiting people, you are 10%, but you own over half of the land by exploitation. Of course you love the country and you don't want to leave. And then they want to fight for black people to own anything. They're like, we need to stay and fight black people so that they don't own nothing. And then others are like, no, we're out of here. Whoa, 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 whoa. So it's like Europeans are allowed to come to Africa, kill, exploit, take over, colonize, oppress, become so rich. And if black people, God forbid, black people fight back, oh, no, 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 no. That's unacceptable. So it's like they're wishing that South Africa and Africa was exactly like Canada and the USA, where the native people, the local people that were found on the land by the Europeans, have been completely conquered, exterminated. Wow.
individuals who wish to immigrate. But the repatriation of Afrikaners as refugees is not a solution for us. We want to build a future in South Africa.
So he is speaking in front of a sign that says AfriForum. Put this in context. And what about Afrikaners saying, no, this is our land. We don't want to come to the United States?
Well, AfriForum is backpedaling furiously now because there's been a huge backlash in South Africa from people who blame it for this situation. In fact, some people have accused it of treason. But if you look at what AfriForum was saying just a decade ago, and certainly in 2018, when people like Kali Kriel, who was head of the AfriForum, and others were coming to the United States, they were claiming there was a white genocide. They were claiming there was a war on white people in South Africa. And they were essentially trying to characterize the post-apartheid era of one of oppression of Afrikaners, that they were the true victims of it. And this is they're not alone in this. There had been a phenomenon ever since the end of apartheid of Afrikaners painting themselves as victims. There was a song emerged in the 1990s called De La Rey. It was very popular with Afrikaners. It was sung in bars and rugby matches. And De La Rey was a famous general who fought to the bitter end against the British in the Boer War, the Second Boer War, in the early 20th century, which the Afrikaners then lost. And this song essentially is an attempt to take Afrikaners back to a time when they were the victims, when it was their women and children dying in the British concentration camp, when they were the people who were oppressed. And it conjures up this Boer general who, he may be losing the war, but he's going to fight to the last, a bitter ender. And this is how they've been characterizing themselves, some of them. And AfriForum is part of that kind of attempt to rewrite history and make out that they're this minority that has long been persecuted, not just by the post-apartheid era, but by the British, and they have a long history. And apartheid was just a means of survival. All they were trying to do was to keep themselves and their culture alive. It has had one other effect, which they hadn't expected and has alarmed them, is that in all the orders that have been given out cancelling aid and agreements, one of them affects agricultural products being imported to the United States, which have generally been duty-free as a means of helping Africa. One result is that their own products are no longer being imported duty-free into the United States. So these white South African farmers who've been complaining of oppression will now actually be being hit with tariffs or regular duties. And so it's going to cost them financially, which is one of the reasons they're so upset by it and pretending that it was nothing to do with them.
Guardian reporter Chris McGreal. He was the Johannesburg correspondent for The Guardian during the last years of apartheid.
Thank you so much, Amy Goodman, for this. You know, my people. So you can see for yourself the entire history, the entire background. I think Trump is gonna lose his momentum if he embarks on this journey of inventing a fiction victim when we have real victims and real serious problems, and he had the momentum and he could fix so many stuff. But if he's gonna get distracted because of Elon Musk and his beef with South Africa, well, then they'll get what they deserve, right? So I personally think it's not a bad idea for people, if they feel oppressed or in danger in any way, to leave South Africa and go to the USA, where the Europeans have already conquered the land. Yeah, man, like sometimes when we live out here in the West and you complain about how some things or racism or this and that, what do they tell you? They're like, leave. If you don't like it here, leave. Go back to Africa, or go somewhere else. So same stuff, my people. If they feel like it's not working out for them and it's really bad where they are, then yeah, bon voyage. Go to America, go somewhere else. You could also go back to Europe. So yeah, let's move into French, and we're gonna comment just a tiny little bit about the Kabila thing, and then we are gonna go into Kinyarwanda, my people. Thank you so much. Thank you for being here, and keep leaving me comments. I see you in the chat. Rene Sharonji, karibu sana. All right, so let's move into French just a tiny little bit and keep talking about. Merci la famille. Alors, en français, on va parler de ce traître, falsificateur, Kabila, usurpateur de l'identité congolaise, qui est venu parler pour ne rien dire à la famille. Oh là là, on en parle.